Today we're going to disassemble DC20's Monster Creation table so we can make better monsters for you to play with down the road.
Disassemble! Dead! Hey, slow down!
When I was first making who's the better killer when we're comparing DC20 Fighter and the D&D 5e Fighter, I started running into some problems. So that second part of that video was initially going to be who is the squishier fighter. Now we've seen the commenter that I've created and we compared it to D&D 5e's commenter, and we did it in the purposes to try to kill those commenters as murder hobos. But in this case, we want to see what happens if those commenters retaliate against that murder hobo. Previously, we were only interested to seeing how much damage they could do, but now we're actually also interested in protecting them. So I decided to give them both plate armor. Then you can compare them to both systems. So now let's go look at that DC20 commenter. Okay, we have down 4 actions here that it's capable of doing. The DC20 commenter has a club, has a +3 to hit, and a 1 bludgeoning damage for that club. So if you look down here for the actions, you can see that the damages for the first attack, second attack, which is going to have that disadvantage, so we're adding an extra action point, and then we have that third attack that's going to have a disadvantage. If we look at the DC20 fighter, there's an 18 and 23 threshold. And so we know that every time we break 18 and 23, we're going to add +1 to the damage, plus potentially doing a crit. And remember, this commenter has a +3 to hit, so it can reach up to a 23, so it can definitely cause that +4 to damage. But every single time that the DC20 fighter takes a hit, it also has that damage reduction from that plate armor. Altogether, they can do 12 points of damage. So in the very first round of combat, a commenter can kill your hero, even though he's just a commenter. Now let's compare that to a D&D 5e. If you look at the D&D 5e, we know that plate armor gives you an 18. The commenter has a +2 to hit, but essentially it has to roll 18 or higher to inflict any kind of damage on the hero. Now we know that the club damage does up to 4 points of damage. It has no bonuses for strength, so that's going to give us 4 damage on a regular hit or 8 damage on a crit. Now, if we're looking at that level 4 fighter, you can take 6 hits from that commenter. And remember, that commenter only has 1 attack. That means it would take that commenter 6 rounds to really knock down that hero compared to the DC20, where it's only going to take 1 round. So as we look at the DC20 fighter, it actually looks like it's more squishier than the D&D 5e. Now, the next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to test how much can your DC20 fighter take from that BBEG we talked about in that Who's a Better Killer video. So if we're looking at Crassus, our BBEG, we can see it has 4 action points, it has a +5 to hit, which means it can roll up to a 25. We can look at that tiered, so it can't necessarily hit that third tier, but you can definitely hit that 23. So again, it's going to give you a +4 to the total damage for every attack that you have. If we look at the different types of attacks that the Crassus has, a lot of times these damages are 2, right? So that tells you that they're going to do 2 damage plus the 4, that's going to give us 6 damage, minus the 1 PD from the plate armor on the DC20 fighter, that's going to reduce it down to 5. So at any given time, the Crassus does 5, 5, 5, but you can do it potentially up to 15 points of damage. So this Crassus can knock out DC20 fighter with 1 round. Now, when I started trying to convert this over to the D&D, it became a little bit difficult because, as you guys know, there's no direct comparison really between DC20 and D&D 5e. But I was trying to do my best to do that. But one thing I started noticing as I was doing this is, wait a minute. We note that the Crassus can do 15 points of damage maximum per round, but the commoner does 12 points of damage maximum per round. That seems odd. We have a commoner and a BBEG, but the commoner can almost do the exact amount of damage, -3, compared to the BBEG. The commoner has 4 hit points. The Crassus has 30 health points. It has over 7 times the amount of hit points, but when it comes to the damage, it really can't do much more damage. So that really got me thinking about how are monsters made in DC20. That Crassus is from the DC20's playtest material, The Hunted. So I wanted to go back and actually start looking at some of those different characters that are in there. I'm not going to really go through all the details because what I want you really to look at is every single one has 4 actions, has a +4 to hit, and can at least do 1 point of damage, and in some cases maybe do 2 points of damage. And the adventure is intended for first level characters. Think about that. If we look at, again, our DC20 fighter and look at the damage output, we know that's 25, right? So we know that our DC fighter can kill these different monsters that are in the hunted. But what about the hunted monsters? We already know what the Cross's BBEG can do. What about the other guys that are considered lesser monsters compared to the BBEG? We can see that Buff can do up to 18 points of damage, and that the Haze can do 15 points of damage. Now, this is based on the fact that Buff has 2 damage he can do with his knuckles. It's only going to cost him 1 action, so he will use that attack only. That's 2 plus 4 is 6. That's going to give us 6 times 3 is going to give us 18 damage. That is more than the BBEG. And let's say we subtract all that PDR from the armor, right? That's still going to give us 15 points of damage. So what is this, right? We are supposed to have a big, bad, evil guy who's stronger than everybody else. But right now, it only seems like the thing that makes him the BBEG is the amount of hit points that they have. So I decided to look at that monster pack that was given to us after the Kickstarter had closed. And I wanted to see that monster creation chart that was in there that I had seen and I talked about in a couple of previous videos. Now, what we're looking at here is what's listed in that monster pack. We have 2 different tables, one that has a little bit more details, different types of minions, but they also have a much more simplified version of this where they give you a little bit more ranges and in terms when it comes to health points. So now let's take a look at some of those monsters that are in that monster starter pack and see where they fare on this table that's on the exact same PDF. Now, if we look here, we're looking at a wolf. It's considered a level 1 lurker. Not really sure what the lurker means. It hasn't been completely described, or it's probably something you have to find on the streams. Now here we're looking at a wolf, but where does it fall in terms of when it comes to this chart that was provided to us? If we look at a wolf, it has 11 health. Look at the chart, it's between 10 and 15. Okay, so it appears to be a mid-level type monster. It also has 4 action points. Its attack bonuses is +4. Interestingly, everything has a +4 attack bonus. There's a whole entire little section he writes down about the probability every monster should have to hit a hero, but I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. Let's just keep moving forward. We'll get back to that. The other thing that's listed in that monster pack is a brown bear. Now, the brown bear has 20 hit points. Right here, it's listed as a level 2 brute. Again, these titles of brute and lurker are not necessarily explained that well. It's saying level 2, so we can go down to the level 2 here. We know it's 20 hit points. It's considered a level 2 type monster, so it has 20. Now let's look at those PDs and MDs. You can see they're not really exactly the way they're supposed to align. We're still getting the +4 attack. We're getting about 2 damage per attack. We're seeing that down there. Okay, all this is making sense. Now let's think about that damage output that this wolf and this brown bear can do. If we look at the wolf, it does 15 points of damage max, again, using those same type of actions we just previously shown. If we look at the brown bear, it does 18 points of damage. So again, this wolf and this brown bear can easily kill your hero in one single round, even if you subtract 1 point of damage using that damage resistance. Okay, well, let's look at a couple more guys. They had a bandit captain. The bandit is a level 1 skirmisher. It has 10 hit points. So we're looking at level 1, 10 hit points. We can go down this row right here, look at what kind of physical defense should it have. We're looking at a 12 and an 8. It's not completely exactly that, but we can see that it's probably within an acceptable range, I guess. And again, it has a +4, 1 damage, and so forth. Now, if we look at the bandit captain, because the battle axe has this heavy hit property, he can do 3 points of damage plus the 4 we had talked about because of that tiered effect based on the fighter's armor class. We can now do 7 points of damage, times that by 3 for every single one of those action points being used, 1, 2, and 1. We got 21 points of damage. So this captain here can do more damage than the BBEG that has 30 hit points in the previous stat block we looked at. So it really got me thinking. We already know that that commoner could do 12 points of damage, and I wanted to go back and really look at that commoner stat and say, did I do things correctly when I looked through that PDF? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at this commoner stat again and really try to find where does the commoner reside in that table. And if we look here, we can see that our commoner has 4 hit points, has 2 PDs of 8, and it has 4 action points. We gave it a mastery bonus to try to kind of copy what we were seeing in the commoner for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. And if we look at the table here, it has less hit points than this low level listed here on the chart. And if we compare that to the other simpler chart, we can see that our commoner probably more likely falls into this category here. So you can see in the simpler chart that the health is between 2 to 5. They have a +2 for the attack and only 2 action points. Interesting, right? If we look at over here, this table, we have a PD of 8 and 8, which is what we had here. But over here, they dropped the MD down to 6. It has a +4 to an attack. And on top of that, a 4 action point. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there. The first thing I wanted to do to really fix that commenter to reduce its lethality, because I just don't think a hero should be able to get easily beat up by a commenter. We're going to reduce those action points to 2. If we look at the damage now, it only has 2 action points. That's going to give us 1 attack that has a normal attack that's going to do up to 5 points of damage. That second attack that has disadvantage is going to be another way to do 5 points of damage. That's 10 max damage to our hero minus the 2 for the PDRs that it has for its armor. It's really only 8 points of damage that potentially this commenter could do now. Now we can see that this commenter is unable to kill the hero in a single round. So I think we're on the right steps here. Let's keep moving forward. What we're looking at here is the actual table again, but I wanted to show you my modifications to this table. I wanted to really make it a little bit more versatile compared to what's listed here and make it kind of match a little bit more with what we're seeing with the commenter. And on top of that, use this new table to really try to fix the other monsters that we're seeing in the monster pack as well as the hunted playtest packet as well. You can see that I completely got rid of this level 1, level 2 health points. I don't think it's really necessary. We can also do this less than or equal to 5 symbol here, or in some cases it's going to be greater than or equal to that specific number. And if you compare these health points to what's on the current table, it's a little more flexible. It really allows you to really change the monsters a little bit more than what you currently can do. The other thing I want to point out is that when we look at this PD and MD, we know that those are directly associated with the attributes of the monster. Based on these PDs and MDs, you can now surmise the numbers that you can put in those stat blocks for those attributes for that monster when you're creating your own monster. If you're looking at damage reduction here, there's a bunch of zeros across the board. But notes that I put down is that this is subjective. Depending on the monster that you're fighting, whether it has armor on, whether it has iron skin, etc., things like that, you can really just change the damage reduction to whatever you want. When it comes to the attack and spell check, I think we really need to reduce these. We can't have this +4 straight across the board. It doesn't really make any sense to me. Let's go ahead and have, in some cases, a 0. In case your stat blocks are complete zeros, you can easily have a +0 to your attack. Then, depending on the level of monster, you can start adding bonuses. And of course, once you start reaching these really huge BBEGs, you can have them have a much greater bonus than just +5. If we look at damages, more recently, the Dungeon Coast has reduced even a fist down to 0 points of damage. And that's all what I simply did here. I basically created a damage attack that is 0, and only if they're able to hit those tiers will they be able to inflict damage on the fighter. And for the damage, I put down here for the notes, it's subjective as well, because it really could depend on the type of claws the monsters might have, what kind of weapons they're bearing.
With claws and fangs. Fucking teeth, man. Fucking teeth on you.
This would also alter the damage, and you can actually change the damages that are supposed to be done by these monsters. When we look at the speed, I decided how is it possible that everything has the exact same speed? We know there's such things as snails, so therefore I put down the speed as a 3 at the minimum, and you can essentially increase that as you get higher and higher levels on that monster chart. And again, this is also subjective because maybe the monster can fly, maybe it has a tunneling that it can do through the dirt, or maybe it's using some type of magic. So again, all these numbers are really subjective, and it should be listed as that in the table. When it comes to action points, I really do think if you're going to create minions, they should only have 1 or 2 action points. This is going to be really good. If you can create 20 minions going to attack your hero, and the only thing they can do is reach the hero, he can attempt to try to kill as many minions as possible. This also helps the hero by not essentially being wiped out in the first round of combat. And then you can see as you continue to look down this chart, as the levels of the monsters go up, you get more and more action points, where finally the highest level of action points you can get is a 4. If you look at the current action points for the monster pack, you can see that you can go up to 8 action points. So this is very strange, right? You start at 2, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, then you go to 8. There's no gradual increase in the number of action points. Now, the reason I didn't put 8 action points at the end of mine is because I think you can balance this by using legendary action points. Starting at the mid-level, you can have legendary actions that are 1 per player or 1 or more per player, and a little bit higher and higher as you continue up the scale here. And I think these legendary points will essentially replace these action points, right? Legendary actions just happen usually. It's an extra effect. It's usually a reaction. It's an automatic save. You can use legendary points any way you want, and you don't longer have to keep track of tons of action points. Okay, you have 8 action points. What are you going to do in all your 8 action points? Just give them some legendary actions instead. Okay, now, so based on that, we can actually start looking back at the commoner. I know, again, with the commoner, I have an obsession with them. I think it's a good way to look at your mechanics for your game. Essentially, the commoner at this point inspired me to look at this monster stat creator and essentially change it. Based on the new rules that we have, we're going to change the passive awareness. We're going to get rid of that mastery bonus to attack because he's just a commoner, maybe just a farmer. He has no proficiency in these weapons. And so the bludgeoning damage for that weapon is just going to be 1, and that's going to be all the damage that he can do. We're going to get rid of our prime number of 1. We're also going to reduce the health points to 2. And this is really going to give us what I think is a really good commoner for us to use. Now, when we start thinking about the damage output that this commoner can do, because it no longer has that +4, it can't hit that next tier of damage against the fighter. So instead, we can only reach that 18. That means we have a +1 to that attack, but we can also get a crit, so that's a +3. So that's 4 points of damage every single attack. That's 2 times 2 for the 2 different attacks. That's 8 maximum points of damage. And when you consider that PDR on that fighter, that's going to reduce it down to 6. Now we're talking about commoners who cannot kill your hero so easily. And I think this is a little bit more balanced out compared to what it was before. Now, the other cool thing we could do with that commoner, if you want to make them something more like lieutenants and captains or maybe brutes, you can easily start adding masteries, maneuvers, giving them some minor spells, give them armor, give them different types of weapons. This will be an easy way to upgrade your commoner. Next thing I want to talk about is something that I think is missing in DC20. What Papa Colville tells us based on his flea mortals as well as his D&D 4E is you need to have minions, 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 right? So on flea mortals, he has a tiered monsters, right? There's one type of goblin that's the queen or the king, and there's a bunch of tiered monsters that are lesser than that. Now, I know that DC20 has put down these different titles, skirmisher, apex skirmisher, lurker, and so forth, but there's really no way to use those titles and really determine what those monsters are. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take some of those monsters, a couple of those monsters that are already in there, and we're going to turn them into what I would consider minions, because I think the way they're built right now, they're a little too powerful. So what we're looking at here is a skeleton. I've decided to turn him into a captain using that regular stat block that's already built in, but we're going to minionize that botch and turn him into a minion. Do that by reducing the hit points to 1, dropping those PDs, dropping the might a little bit, giving it only 1 action point, giving it a +1 to attack, and getting rid of the bow on that monster. Those give us a skeleton captain and a bunch of minions surrounding him that can go out and attack the incoming heroes. In addition, one thing we could do is add those reactions, right? So we mentioned that there's a lot of different types of reactions we can use. You can easily add a reaction where he looks at a fallen minion and tells it to rise and it comes back up. In addition, we can give a plate armor to that skeleton king or captain, giving it a 1 PDR, allowing it to reduce damages from the hero if we really want to. So I wanted to look at this alpha wolf and I wanted to unionize that botch. And so what I decided to do is make it that wolf into an alpha wolf, give it a reaction, which I'm just calling frenzy. If it sees another wolf fall, it immediately gets to make a 15 square movement and start attacking whoever the killer of its minion. And if we want to look at that minion stat block, I reduced those HP down to 2. I gave it 2 actions again, but essentially kept everything else. These are just examples of how to take some of those monster stat blocks that are in that DC20 playtest packet or the monster pack and try to minionize them using that new set of rules that I provided in that table, just by adding some of the maneuvers that are in the playtest packet already. Now, the final thing I want to say is that I think in order for that first player core book to come out to be really good, you're going to have some very basic monsters in the very back of that book. D&D has them. I've mentioned it in the past. It allows you to play a Game of Thrones style game if you just add a white and a dragon. And I also have a copy of this Dragon's Bane here. And this Dragon's Bane, I'm not going to flip through the pages, but at the very back, it has a nice list of monsters that we're all familiar with and should be a key part of your game anyways. So I think what I'm going to suggest for the DC20 player core book, when they come out with that monster appendix in the back, you should have a good list of different types of NPCs, zombie skeletons. I'm not going to read all these. I think there's just some basic monsters that every campaign should have. And if you really want to start having exotic monsters, that's something that you can put into a monster core book that probably come out in the near future. And that's it, everybody. I hope that monster table is going to be useful. I hope it's a good RPG boon for you. And I hope when you're starting to create those monsters, it really helps you balance out creating those minions, those captains, lieutenants, and some brutes. Add some of those maneuvers so they could be attacking enhancements. My other hope is that using this table will allow us to save some of those very squishy fighters out there, or any of the PCs that are in DC20.
Someday we might look back on this and decide that
Saving DC20 player characters
was the one decent thing we were able to pull out of this hole.
World of RPG systems. Okay, everybody. I hope those RPG boons were useful for you. For those people out there who are making DC20 monsters on that Discord, hopefully you can look at that table and it will inspire you to make much more balanced monsters. Hopefully it's the word you can pass to the dungeon coach. Let him know that, you got it from RPG boons. I don't want any money, but you always got to, credit your references. I'm Don Franco 3. This is RPG Boons, where we talk about everything RPG and how everything is RP. If you like the cut of my gibberish, hit the subscribe button, leave me a comment, I'll get back to you. And Dungeon Coach, we're playing phone tag here. Give me another call. Catch you next time.